This project was supported by Award 15 PJ DP 22 GK 00946 MUMU, awarded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and the Office of Justice Programs. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this videocast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. In today's podcast episode on 321 Mentoring, our researcher will share resources that can support you in implementing components of this model in your program or in a mentor-to-mentee relationship. All the links to the resources mentioned will be found in the description below in the order that they are mentioned in the episode. Hello, everyone. My name is Aryan Nima. I am an NMRC Youth Advisory Council member at Mentor. I work under the National Mentoring Resource Center project and am excited to be here today with Michael Karcher from the University of Texas at San Antonio for a Reflections on Research podcast episode on the 321 mentoring technique and mentor and mentee relationships. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. Let's jump right in. So first, could you introduce yourself and what you do in the field of mentoring?
Thanks, Arden. I'm Mike Karcher, and I've been studying youth mentoring programs since around 1993, I think. I'm a full-time professor at the university. I teach in the Department of Educational Psychology. I teach human development theory. I teach program evaluation courses, train school counselors, school psychologists, that kind of thing. But the 321 technique that we'll talk about comes from my work studying peer mentoring models, which is a love you and I both have. And so I may talk a little bit about that, but I started a peer mentoring model with a school in Austin in 1992, and then stuck with them and evaluated it. And it was one of my first publications was the evaluation of that program. And that program, that peer mentoring model approach, as well as like the 321, are like really attractive to people. And so it's exciting to be able to sort of talk about these things. I also study mentoring activities and I study school-based mentoring programs in general. But the peer mentoring thing is kind of what I'm known for. And I will say the 321 technique, tool, approach that we'll talk about is one of the things that practitioners have told me, spontaneously has been one of the most useful and very simple techniques that they've learned from researchers. So I'm excited to get a chance to talk with you about it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing your incredible contributions to this field. So my first question for you is, what is the 321 mentoring technique, and what is the most effective way to implement it in mentoring programs?
Okay. So, when we talked about this before, it felt to me like describing the history of how it emerged was useful. But let's just start off with what is the 321 technique. So like at its most basic, it's a structured set of questions that can be tweaked a little bit for content that could be used at the beginning of a mentor-mentee match, or a meeting, or it could be used at the end of a meeting on a given day. It can also be used in preparation for and as part of the final match closing event or ceremony. So the three is identify three things that went well. And it could be went well or that you liked about the activities of the day or about our relationship today or overall. So three positives. And then what's important is two negatives. So the three and then the two. Two is, what are two things you didn't enjoy today or that didn't go well for you, that you didn't like doing in our meeting or in our relationship? Or what are two things you didn't like that I did? What two things didn't go well? And naming the honest truth is, I think, really, really helpful. And then the one is typically to be future leaning, future forwarding. What's one thing we want to try to do next week when we get together? Or what's one thing, if you were to use the 3-2-1 at the end of a mentoring relationship, what is one thing I'm kind of hopeful you'll take from our time together forward, or one thing you'll work on in the next relationship that might be based on kind of the negative feedback, or one thing that I saw about you that really made you shine, that I hope you continue to do. So it's a forward facing, future directed hope and wish, um, and it's also kind of a time marker, like, we had today, or we had our relationship, now going forward. So 3-2-1. And we can talk about different variations of it, but that's the technique. I'll hold off on doing any history until I get an invitation from you.
Yeah. And then on to the next is like, what is the most effective way for mentoring programs to implement it?
Yeah, whenever, so I'm a researcher, and I review mentoring research. I worked with David Dubois on the Handbook of Youth Mentoring. This is the second edition, and there's an even bigger first edition. So when I hear the word effective, I always think of clinical trials. Like, somebody says, "Is something effective?" And I'll say, "Well, has it been shown to be effective in a clinical trial, in an experiment?" And really, nobody's done experiments with this. So anything I would say about its effectiveness or effective implementation or use would be based on my own experience or what people have told me,
Right.
So it's not research based, it's just experimentally. Um, I think if I had to say what's the most effective use of it, meaning like I could only use it in one way in a mentoring program, I would probably suggest it be done at the end of every meeting, and take 5 or 10 minutes and reflect on what happened, because then you get lots of doses of it. Now, that's assuming that there is some end of year closure activity that includes something like this anyway. But it was
Right.
initially intended to be at the end of the relationship. Let's talk about 3 things that went well and 2 things that didn't go so well. And, one thing I'm hopeful for you going forward in your future relationships with friends or mentors or others. So end of match reflection activity is what I would sort of put my money on if I had to place it somewhere, partly because so often mentors don't really know what their mentees are thinking about what they did or what they talked about or how they felt about any given thing. I'm always surprised at what I learn. Um, I remember a mentee I had in a middle school, and in the 3-2-1 at the end, and I said, what are the 3 things you really enjoyed about our time together? And I was really struck because he said, um, "You're really funny." And I thought, well, that's like that didn't sound very deep or whatever. But then as he talked about it, I realized, he could look forward to kind of having some fun, or something lighthearted. And he was a kid who was going through a lot of losses in his life. So I remember being really struck by that. Now, I kind of wish I had learned that early on. I don't know, maybe would have tried to be funnier, or I don't know, but you're often surprised by what you hear, and it's good to learn. If you were to do something that somebody didn't like, it'd be much better to learn about it in week 2 than week 27, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's absolutely awesome information. I think the 3-2-1 mentoring technique does a great job on initiating those deeper mentor and mentee relationships that actually stick for the future. So even past that end date that you're talking about, hopefully the mentor and mentee still stay connected through social platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. So this flows directly into my next question, and how can we encourage mentors and mentees to reflect on their relationships? And how do we talk about disappointing relationships in a polite way, but also in an effective way?
Hmm. So you're honing in on um, the 2 of the 3-2-1, right?
Right.
I think there's two things that we're kind of taught to avoid socially in America. Um, and one is, formally saying goodbye, which is why we're always so averse. Well, that's one reason we're so averse to like closing matches and ending matches. And we always want to like string them on. That's also partly a fault of us researchers and us allowing the practitioners to believe that longer matches are better. I was going to say always better. They're not always better, and I'm not even sure they're in general better. Um, but the other thing, and it's especially um, the German word verboten, right? It's especially taboo in adult youth, what Tom Keller calls hierarchical, relationships rather than horizontal. To tell an adult what you don't like about what they did or said, like that. There's so many adults that do not encourage that. There's some cultural groups that really sort of view that as not appropriate conversation, um, or even just family. Some family cultures they don't appreciate that. So a lot of kids don't get a lot of opportunity to articulate what frustrates them or disappoints them or left them feeling invalidated or unappreciated, or I think often some people like me could think they're being funny but really be hurtful and not know. So but we avoid, creating structures for kids to give feedback like that. And so we need to do that. We need to coach it. We need to do it well. I think, the 3-2-1 doesn't really have a lot of the 3-2-1 as it's written up in the materials. And I think I sent you some materials so that you could link those. Some that we'll
Right.
talk about, including the newly matched game, but the 3-2-1 reflection activity so that people can see it. There's not a lot of instruction on how to do it right. Um, I think the most important thing is simply to train mentors to make clear that negative experiences and negative feelings are part of all relationships. And so being able to share them with the hope that the relationship will be stronger and that we will feel, as a function of having both communicated and heard this feedback, we will feel more fully represented in the relationship. Like it will feel more authentic, even if it's uncomfortable to say what you said upset me or hurt me. I mean, one of my favorite examples was talking to a mentee who was real impulsive, and he would just get up and run out of the room. And it was a group, event, and he'd run out of the room, and then I have to go like chase him. It was like embarrassing. So like telling him I'm embarrassed when you like just bolt out of the room, and I think you're being playful and pushy. But you just need to know that I feel really uncomfortable as a guest at this school, and I feel like a fool actually. So I don't think you mean that. I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe we could talk about that, maybe not, but that makes me feel disconnected from you. And so I often, that's another way of saying it is, I want to know what happened today that led us to be more disconnected than connected. Now, some point in this podcast, it would be really important to make clear that my experience is that not everybody, and especially not young kids, middle school kids and younger, but even high school kids, not everybody can talk about the relationship early on. So it's much safe. Often in a program, what you'll notice, and you look at the instructions, you'll see at the beginning can be easiest to talk about a thing that isn't you and me. It's like what went well today, what activity did you like, and then the mentor can start to model communicating on the relationship. Like, when you volunteered to share with the group what we had talked about, I was really proud of you. That was a really good thing, right? I felt really connected to you, that what we got to talk about, you volunteered. um, I can say the positives, and then I can start to introduce the negatives it would make me feel closer to you if you didn't always run off with your friends, or if when you brought your friend to our meeting in the library today and I had to like deal with that. I really want to spend time with you because you get to spend time with your friends. I'll feel closer to you and get to know you better if it's just the two of us, or if you need to have a friend come at some point, that we plan it so I don't feel disrespected, and then let it go. Just sort of bring it up, right? Um, can I share one one observation, which is sometimes kids are more sensitive than they appear, and one failing, it isn't just tied to the 3-2-1. I see it with mentors a lot. We may say something, and we may say it strongly, or we might even say it gently, and the kid, I believe, hears it, they recognize it, but they don't respond. They don't show a facial gesture. They don't say, I'm sorry. My own kids struggle with that. I'm like, that's like a golden ticket if you can just say, I'm sorry. So, but they don't show, kids often don't show anything, even though they've heard you. And so then adults think they need to double down, which means say it again, or say it louder, or say it with explanation of the consequences, and they kind of ramp it up. Um, and so then the child really feels, oppressed by this complaint. So I really think it's important just to put things out there and let them sit. And if it doesn't change from week to week, then spend a little more time on it. But often just saying, I really didn't like it when you did this, or it hurt my feelings when you did this, that's enough. And it's better to err on they got it, but they're not showing it, than to err on you don't seem to take this seriously. Let me double down. And then you lose all your street cred when you go down that route, right?
Right.
So I think just talking about how important it is to be honest in relationships, and even talk about examples where you've done that, with and then and share those with the kids, so the kid knows it isn't just in this relationship, but in other relationships. I also tell people what I need or what I want from them, or how I feel in response to what they've done, rather than just being quiet or walking away. So doing that, and then trusting that the child hears you, and maybe do a little mental experiment. If it happens again the next week, again, just drop the point lightly. And if it happens a third time, then you probably need to sit down and really, but give them a chance to correct course without becoming a punitive teacher or vice principal.
Right. Yeah, I think it's extremely important to have those difficult and maybe even uncomfortable conversations in the moment, like you said, rather than the time at closure, because then if you only mention it at closure, then all those sessions that you spent with your mentor or mentee are almost wasted in a way, because you didn't get the full potential, because you guys didn't want to have that difficult conversation in the moment. And I think that mentors can start modeling, like you said, these negative conversations or these difficult conversations, and maybe help the mentee follow and open up to them, and kind of make sure that they are confident enough to tell them what the mentee didn't like about the mentor, um, kind of evening out that hierarchy that is prevalent in our society today,
Mm-hmm.
especially with mentors, mentees, or kids and parents.
Yeah.
So
Can you imagine? I was just thinking about what you said. Can you imagine what it's like if the mentor waits until the last day to say, and there's like 30 meetings in a year, like school year, like, um, two things I didn't like about what you did all year. Like on the last day, you say this stuff, be like you said, like you think, what was going on in my mentor's head if they felt that way the entire time? Was it even real? Like that would be so jarring, right? And like undermining. So yeah, I wouldn't do a 3-2-1 if you've never done one before. And if I could just add, the history of this is we came up with 3-2-1 as part of a closure ritual, because a closure is really important in my program and in my experience. But then we found that actually, kids needed to do it a couple times, because kids would think, like after the match had closed, oh, I thought about the things that I liked about our time together, or that I wanted to give feedback on. And so then they were having to then write letters, and writing letters as a 3-2-1 is a great thing to do as well. But we learned you couldn't just do it once. You had to like prepare for it. And then we just learned, heck, let's just do it all year, because then they really are ready with the language. Um, And it was surprising to me how unprepared and unskilled kids can be, young kids and boys in particular, to reflect honestly and directly on the relationship. So it became apparent to me these are skills kids don't have, and they need them if this is relational intervention. So let's just do it all year. So we do it at the beginning of the match meeting, at the end of the match meeting. We write down notes and keep them. Like I said, we can talk about how we use those notes, but like it becomes a bit of history making where we can take those things we liked and disliked and use them both for program development, but the match can use them for later activities. And at the end, to prepare for the closure, they can look back at the year, together, and then also individually and think, what do I want to highlight, kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah. And so my final question ties this all together is why does all this reflection with the 3-2-1 technique lead to growth for mentees and mentors and even the program as a whole?
Well, you know what, my, we had a great conversation, preparatory conversation, and what I'm about to share wasn't in any of what you said previously, but I'm just sort of struck by the fact that, a lot of kids interact through social media, and there's no honest feedback for the user of social media. Usually there isn't, we don't get a lot of, there aren't many opportunities for practice in relationship. Um, Saying what we need or saying if we've been hurt, and asking for the person to sit with to sit with us in that. And I think our society is becoming highly shame avoidant. And, shame is the parallel to narcissism. And I think with the social media focus that my kids have and society has, there is a how do I look and how do I present? And the flip side of that is avoiding feelings of shame that I'm not good, or even guilt that I've done something wrong. And I think we really need to coach kids in guilt, to help them overcome shame. Guilt is a lot better than shame. And so if a kid can say, if you can say, when you took off down the hall and left me in the room alone, you know, um, I felt abandoned and kind of hurt. And then if they can say, I'm sorry that you felt that way, right? That allows them to have a behavior that that affected somebody, that they can say, I'm going to try not to do that going forward. Versus, I didn't like the fact that you're the kind of kid who doesn't mind hurting my feelings by running down the hall all the time. That, if I'm saying you are the kind of person who does that to other people, that's shame, right? That you're bad. And I think being able to say you did something, it led me to disconnect. I want to connect with you is, well, it's essential to all effective, relationships. You can't be in an intimate relationship if you're not going to be honest with the other person about how they're affecting you, and also to be able to respond to them when you've hurt them. So these are life skills. I don't know where else you learn them. A lot of kids don't learn them in families. They don't really teach them well in school, or if they teach them, they don't teach them in a real life setting. So I think if you think about what does a mentor do, and I think the four things mentors do is they play with kids, they talk, they may help the kid learn something or do something. In that talking, there's kinds of conversations you can have with a mentor you don't have with a teacher or a tutor or even a coach. And so mentors provide a real social development lifeline in that way. Um, but also, if I could, so stepping away from, we need to be able to tolerate and react to guilt to strengthen relationships. We need practice in that. This organization, the Christian Association for Youth Mentoring, they do amazing work setting up evidence-based programs for mentoring in churches. And so if anybody wants to reach out and learn more about them, I encourage them to do that. And I worked with them in another organization called Boy with a Ball. That's also a faith-based organization. And we worked on a curriculum. I'm just going to do quick little aside. And the curriculum was based on some ideas where I saw in the in the Gospel of John, which people have described as of the four Gospels, the farewell gospel, because it's a lot about Jesus saying, I'm going to leave you. And when I do, the Holy Spirit's going to come back and be here with you. I'm not going into a bunch of religious stuff, but I want to highlight that one of my favorite people in the world and mentors, Mike Nuckola, once said, I think the role of a youth mentor is to prepare kids for the next relationship to come, right? And so we really want to make sure that everything that happened gets in the relationship now with a mentee gets named and owned, and then we say goodbye and we carry those lessons and those beliefs about ourselves as good people, as caring people, as lovable people, um, into future relationships. But also emphasizing this notion of goodbye allows opportunities for us to talk about the losses. A lot of kids experience a lot of loss, and society being afraid of loss and negative feelings, we don't talk about it. So many kids who never get a chance to talk about their you know, mother who died, their father who left them, whatever the loss is, or even so many kids in poverty being plucked from one social setting to another and not able to grieve that, you know. And so talking about relationships and how we carry with us relationships going forward is super powerful. And the 3-2-1 allows us to kind of see that and name that and prepare for a closure that brings us fully into the relationship and then wraps up the relationship with a hopeful wish for the future. So, in terms of social skills, but also in dealing with loss, past losses, the loss of the relationship, and this idea that we carry people with us, I think is just a huge opportunity that mentors have that very few other adults have to help kids learn to make sense of these experiences.
Right. Yeah, I think all this reflection also creates a more authentic mentoring program where they start seeing um, results in their mentor and mentee matches because they're taking the time to have these conversations and teaching these life skills not only for the mentees, but growth for the mentors because many high school students that are mentoring middle school or elementary school students really don't have this skill, but these reflections on relationships, like you said, help their future relationships, um, and how they communicate in their future relationships, just like they communicated with their mentee. So I
I,
know you were working on developing something called the newly matched game. Could you talk about that a little bit?
yeah. Now we have it written up, not in the best form, but it's good enough. As my father-in-law used to like to say, it's good enough for government work. I think I sent that to you. If I didn't send it to you, I will. And then that is a template. But 50 years ago, there was a show called the Newlywed Game where couples would come on board and then there would be questions. So here's the instructions question book for the Newlywed Game. And then they would have one partner go in the room and then they would ask the other partner to answer questions and they'd write them on these little placards. And then the partner comes back and they see who guessed correctly. It's really funny. So we do a newly matched game where like newly matched, and the more times you can do it, the better. It's a cute way, but I also want to say it's sort of like putting cheese on broccoli. Like you sometimes to get kids to do things that are good for them, you got to like make it more appealing in some way. And so we found it was like boys were like, I don't want to write down this stuff. I don't want to ask these questions. But then we thought, well, if we could make it competitive and there would be some awards. Once you bring in competition, you can sort of convince people to do this. And we could then say every time you do a 3-2-1 at the end of the match, you can write down and use that. We'll keep it for you between meetings. Then you can use that information later on to answer the questions that we're going to do in the newly matched game, and you can win things. And then we have people, sponsors from the community who give gift cards to ice cream stores or whatever. So it sounds kind of serious, but even for kids, you can get them excited about it if you just kind of go in the back door and kind of put some cheese on the broccoli or something. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to implement. in any mentoring program. And I think that gets the mentor and mentee a lot closer to each other. And you actually learn a lot that may be something you didn't know about your mentee, and now you do know because of the game. And I think the game can be played in any age group, like just making it more appealing for them, like with prizes or competition.
I'll
So
and I'm going to send you, I'm going to upload these so that you know, but that stuff comes from the program curriculum that we use for the peer mentoring, which is in a group setting. And I would even say what's one thing I've also observed is the the kids learn fun things, or they learn things about each other through watching the competition, where there's three matches that are up there trying to compete, right? So it really is a way for to actually connect those kids to the other kids in a kind of confined, safe environment in a neat way. So sorry to interrupt you again.
no problem. Yeah, so thank you thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and share your experience, research and insights. It was truly a pleasure to hear about the impactful work that you were doing in the mentoring field. Thank you again, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you very much. It was a real honor to be with you today. I appreciate it, Arian.